Hi, Nathan Cole here, and today we're talking risk and reward in violin auditions, any auditions really. Ceiling and floor, the box, got a lot of concepts to cover. You could also call this video, Why Don't the Best Players Always Win Auditions, or something similar. So many times it comes down to risk reward and a great planning. I want to let you know that I'm going to be working today partly from Strauss's Don Juan, and if you like, you can download my part, my markings, my fingerings, bowings, and all of that. Same part that I've used for countless auditions. Some winners, some losers. Follow the link in the description. That's my gift to you if you want to follow along. I want to start with a story about a different excerpt, though. This is actually from Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra, and in a very early audition I was preparing for the Chicago Symphony. This is how the excerpt, in my opinion, should go. Starts out as a fugue subject. Those are the first three notes of the subject. I played for someone in the orchestra as part of preparation, and I had seen some other orchestras that had what I thought was a really killer fingering up here on the G string. Really intense and great. So I thought, didn't come off so well in this lesson I was playing. It was out of tune, sound wasn't great. I was obviously a little disappointed by that, and the coach's question was, why did you do that? And I had my reasons, you know, I'd seen and heard it, it sounded great. I thought that would be the best possible way to play it. But I didn't really answer the question, why did I do it? Because there wasn't a good reason for me to do that. We'll get to why that was. But this is all about risk and reward. Really, that story sums up in so many ways what an audition really is. It's a lot like a blind date or speed dating. You know, someone, or in the case of an audition, some many, are making a quick decision based on some pretty limited information. And like in a speed date, the venue's already chosen, right? The material, the excerpts are already chosen. You could say the activities that you might do on this speed date are chosen. And even your physical features, you know, what you look like, pretty much already chosen. But you have the choice about how to work with what you've got. Now there's long-term work, you know, in the dating world that would be a diet, exercise, maybe therapy, all the rest. Violin, of course, we've got our long-term stuff we can do. But then there's that short-term planning, your clothing. Talking about dating again now, although clothing can be an important choice for an audition too. What you're going to wear, your style, your gestures, your delivery, all that's up to you in the short term, planning for that event. So going back to this Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, you know, why was this selected for the audition in the first place? That's what I should have been thinking about. You know, it's really about centered pitch, perfect rhythm and pulse, and showing that you know the difference between the tune or the fugue subject and how to accompany, which is what I just finished by doing. So it's really, in terms of the speed dating, not to wear out the analogy, it's really more of a get to know you type question, okay? It's not the main course. There really shouldn't be any chance of humiliation or falling on your face in that one. And yet that's exactly what I was doing with my potential. Yikes, want to have that one back. So the lesson is I took a big risk for really no reward, because playing that on the G string wasn't going to show the committee anything that they needed to know about how I played that music. So that's really the worst combination, big risk, no reward. In life always we want no risk and big reward. But you know, just like with money and get rich quick schemes, doesn't really work that way. At least, however, we want to go with the safest bets that are really going to pay off while doing long-term work in the background. I do want to address a common myth, something I hear a lot about auditions, because I'm not telling you that you should, just play it safe. It's an audition. You got to just play it safe and be boring. That's not really what I'm saying. It's a myth that only boring players can succeed in auditions. But you have to be smart with the risks, the potential rewards. You have to stay aware of the occasion. It's a solo, in most cases, unaccompanied performance. All right, so that is the background for what we're going to talk about today. I want to introduce this concept of the box. So if you can imagine that with me, you've heard countless times the phrase thinking outside the box. An audition is really not the time or the place to do that. Okay? Auditions are about building trust between you and the committee, you and perhaps the music director. Building trust in different situations. Again, if you're talking about a human relationship, you're getting to know someone. At first they want to say, okay, I can trust you out in public, out here at this bar or restaurant. Next, maybe they want to know, can I trust you around my friends? Can I trust you around my family? Can I trust you in a crisis, in an emergency situation? Those are the kind of things that an audition can help answer. And so the box, that's really the total range of acceptable behaviors in a situation. It's all the possible acceptable ways to play a piece of music. Now, obvious question, how do you know what's in the box and what's out of the box? Because opinions could differ, right? It's going to come down to, number one, your instinct or your taste. Different people have different tastes, but there's an acceptable range if you're interested in joining a professional orchestra, I would say. And so you develop an instinct, criteria, taste about that. Number two, you can base it on experience. Maybe you've played some of these pieces in orchestra. At least perhaps you've played a lot of pieces by a certain composer. So experience. And number three, of course, feedback. You're playing these excerpts for someone who has successfully auditioned before. You get that feedback. So those are three good ways to start figuring out what goes in the box and what's outside. Now that box includes things like pitch and rhythm, sound quality, tempo, dynamics, and then we get to your sense of rubato and all kinds of other expressive choices. Imagine the center of this box. That's what we could call the safest, right? Or the stuff that everyone could agree on. That tends to be pitch and rhythm, basically. Those you want really right at the center of the box. We don't want any questions about that. For those other factors, what do you have to do? You have to experiment to see how close to the center, how close to the edges you want to place those things. So let's look at sound quality, and we'll go right to Don Juan with that famous opening. Those quick notes. How do I know how aggressive I want to be? It has to be a super exciting opening, right? At least in the full orchestral performance. So, how quietly, how non-aggressively could I play those before I decide, you know what, that's just outside. No one would consider that appropriate for this excerpt. Or even less, maybe? Even less? And now I feel like, okay, that's obvious. That's outside the box. There's nothing there to the sound. Let me go the other way, right? Getting some more noise, more grit. Now I'm definitely feeling, and I'm sure you are with this microphone a couple inches away, that's outside the box. That's too aggressive, just too noisy. So now I'm going to pull it back. And that's inside the box, even if it's more toward one side, guts, aggressive, power, whatever you want to call it. So that process of pushing it outside the boundary and then pulling it just safely back in, that's what you have to do with any number of factors. Another excerpt that you can experiment with the sound quality question might be Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. We've got another fugue there. And once again goes to accompaniment. Now that's supposed to be loud. It's an aggressive moment. But how little is too little? How much is too much? Let me push it. That's definitely louder. I'm working harder. I wouldn't say it's outside the box for sure. Okay, yeah, that's too much. That's too much. Pull it back. That's borderline, like maybe literally on the border of the box. Let me pull it safely inside and see what that sounds like. First of all, going through this exercise develops so much fine control. You start to get a sense of how you can dial things up and down. So just doing the exercise is great practice, but then deciding what's in, what's out, what's safely in. Okay, tempo. We talked about sound quality. Tempo, another factor that you want to play around with in this way. If you take Mozart's 39th Symphony, the slow movement, deciding on that tempo is often difficult, but we can look at it the same way. This is the one that goes... And if you like that tempo, feel free to borrow it. What's too slow? You know, how can we take it slower? So, you know, I'm used to playing it quicker than that. That's not my favorite, I can tell. But I wouldn't say it's outside the box. I wouldn't say it's definitely too slow. What might that be? Okay, now that is just slow. Pull it back. Yeah. Similarly, I won't bore you with the whole process. You do the same thing on the quick end. Pull it back in. You start to get the range of the box, the size of the box for this factor. Something a little bit more upbeat, the Schumann Scherzo, the Scherzo from the Second Symphony. That requires something inside the border, to be sure. That's marked at quarter equals 144, which I might not nail that number, but it's fast, and usually I advise people to plan on slower than that. Something like that might be 144. And so, is that outside the box? No. It's starting to feel frantic, but I don't know if that's outside. Okay, I'm going to say that's Looney Tunes now. That's outside the box. Pull it safely in. Same thing on the low end. So, you get it. Dynamics, this comes into play as well. Now, this gets tricky because often we want a lot of dynamic contrast, right? We might want our dynamics to end up near the edges of the box. Take Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream, the Scherzo. Can be a tough one to start for many reasons, but the dynamic there, piano, nobody can tell what dynamic I'm playing if they're just hearing me unaccompanied, right? They can hear sound quality. So, you know, how loud can I play that before it's definitely not a piano, before it's outside the box, right? I mean, that doesn't sound like a piano under my ear, but I wouldn't say it's definitely not a piano to anybody. Okay, finally, that's definitely outside. But you've got to do the same on the other end too, because I haven't quite hit the limit. Now I'm not getting sound, so I got to pull it back up a little bit. That's inside, but it's borderline. So you see again, I go through it for tempo, sound quality, dynamic. Often dynamics and sound quality go together, don't they? You heard that on the high end, I didn't exactly lose the objective quality of my sound. I wasn't scratching, but I decided, you know what, that's just subjectively, that's not piano anymore. I have to make that decision. On the low end, however, you heard how at a certain point I just lost contact with the string. I wasn't getting any kind of reliable sound. Big risk, right? So partly for that reason, I decided that's outside the box. Rubato, other expressive devices, starts getting more and more subjective, of course. All I want to say about that is that this applies especially to the orchestral excerpts in an audition. For your solo selections, you know, you do you. All I would say is to keep the box in mind. Keep it in mind. The audition is not the time to display the latest and craziest ideas, perhaps. There might be another occasion for that. Just remember risk and reward. What do you want to get out? What do you want your listener to get out of every choice you make? So, to sum up the box is the entire world of musical possibilities that could be considered acceptable for a certain piece of music. All the acceptable possibilities. You decide what's in the box, and then you decide what's ideal. Where ideally would I want to place dynamics, tempo, all of that. So the dynamics often we want closer to the edges, pitch and rhythm, right there in the center. Tempo could be anywhere depending on the character that you want. So now let's move to our other visual concept for today, and that's ceiling and floor. Okay? So if the box represents the choices available to anyone, the ceiling and floor is all about defining what are the choices for you in particular. To put it simply, your ceiling is your very best playing. Your floor is your current worst playing. So your audition day could happen anywhere in that range, couldn't it? And really, this has to affect every choice you make. It affects where in the box you plan on putting things. You may want to put a dynamic here, right at the outer border, but your ceiling and your floor tell you you better plan on something else. Again, it's a little bit, think of dating and think of clothing. They make all kinds of clothing. Different fashion houses make all kinds of creations, right? It doesn't mean I, Nathan Cole, should wear all of it, or or a very wide range of it. For example, for me, double-breasted suits, pants with cuffs, if I'm dressing up. These are never going to be the best look for a person of shorter stature like I am. It's a little bit like fingering choices for a violinist with smaller hands, isn't it? I can't change my height, you can't change your hand size. But other clothes, even if they might not look good on me now, they might look better on me if I changed something about my body, things that I could change, right? That's the long-term work we were talking about earlier, diet, exercise, and the like. We've got our long-term work we can do too, scales, etudes, and all of that. So our long-term goal should be, of course, to raise our ceiling, also to raise the floor. We want our best playing to be better. We want our worst playing even to be still okay, or actually very good. Now, some kinds of work do both. We're not going to get into all of that in this video. Some kinds of work are more specific to either raising your potential or shoring up weaknesses. I hate to dwell on the negative, but if I had to pick, I would say for auditions, your floor is more important. Okay, I've seen people win auditions with not that high a ceiling, but a pretty high floor. They had the narrow range of possibilities, but their performances were predictable. They could count on them, and they had a plan that fit in with that range. So ultimately, of course, what I want for myself, what I want for you, a high ceiling, a high floor. Here's the thing though, they're never going to be high enough for you. And so when you're preparing for an audition that's coming up, you have to be honest and say, you know what, this is where I am, this is my ceiling, this is my floor. As Clint Eastwood said as Dirty Harry in Magnum Force, man's got to know his limitations. That actually sounded a little bit more like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, I think. But looking again at that Schumann Scherzo tempo, okay? Let's say I want to place it near the outside of the box because I like that feeling, that character. Etc. I really like that, but in experimenting, in practicing, I realize that that's really my ceiling. That's how it goes on my best day. And I'm not going to tell you whether that was my ceiling. Maybe I have worlds of possibilities beyond that. If that really is my best day, if that's my ceiling, then that can't be my plan for the audition. Because what happens if I'm amped up, I'm nervous, and I start playing faster than that? Well, that's going to be outside my range, and that's a pretty terrible plan, because just as easily I could have planned on something in the middle of my range, right? The center of my range, and then no matter what happens on audition day, I'm safe. I'm between my ceiling and my floor. That is a good example for tempo. What about dynamics, as in the Beethoven Third Symphony Scherzo? Now that's marked pianissimo, goes etc. So how loud should pianissimo be? Who can say? If your answer consciously or subconsciously is as quietly as I can play, that's the wrong answer. Might be a good answer when you're sitting in the orchestra and you've got 15 other people there to share the risk with you. But when it's all on you, unless it's your very best day, that's a terrible plan. You got to plan on your worst day, and you have to know what that is likely to feel like. So you're going to plan for the center of your range. How big is that box? Could this be pianissimo? Could this be? Once you decide, based on, remember those three factors, your instinct or taste, your experience, getting feedback. Once you decide what that range is, you put it in the center for pianissimo. Because then no matter what happens on the day, you're in your range. You're between your floor and your ceiling. Let's do one more example to close this out. This would be fingering choice, expressive choice. Brahms' Fourth Symphony, the slow movement. There's a gorgeous section, but it is a difficult violin excerpt. Starts like this. So far, so good. Now we've got a choice to make because we've got an octave interval coming up. So far, I've been on the G string. Most people are. Big decision is, do I play on the D string or that? In orchestra, easy answer. I'm going to do that second version every single time, sharing the risk. By myself, how do I feel about that? Where is that in my floor to ceiling range? Am I getting that 5 times out of 10? Not good enough. 7 times? Nah. 8? Nah. 9? Maybe 9 times out of 10, I say sure. So if I want to do it in an audition, I've got to do enough long-term work that sort of slide, right? Whether I've got an audience. Now there are ways to work on that. I've got a video called Never Miss a Violin Shift Again. I gotta tell you, since I made that video, I've missed a shift. I can't believe it. But there are ways you can work on that those sorts of things aren't scary. So if I'm taking an audition, I'm doing that because I feel great about it. I'm willing to live with that risk because it's well between my floor and my ceiling. But I tell people every day, if that's not working well for them, or if they've got a big wolf, I've got a little wolf on the C, but it's okay. B, C, C sharp, those are the wolfiest notes on the violin. We've got 3 long ones. So if that's just not your bag, and some of you listening might say, you know what, Nathan, you should do the D string version because that just sounds better. So the long-term work, raise your ceiling, especially your floor, so that you can push against the boundaries of that box comfortably. No playing it safe, just managing risk and reward. How to do that? Got plenty of other videos to talk about that. Reminder, if you want that Don Juan part, Don Juan, the reason to get that, not just to see my bowings and fingerings, because you could come up with things, but it's to think about it in the context of what we talked about today. Can you determine why I've made those choices? Because those are the ones I do in auditions, battle tested, right? If you can start to figure out why I would make those choices, then you're well on your way to putting together your own great plan that manages your risk and reward. Okay, I'll see you next time.